Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and Will Hathaway, our guest today, author of What If God Is Like This? And his latest book, The Human Side of Christ. Will has spent about 13 years in youth ministry before transitioning into his current position as a college and career pastor. Before that, he was in law enforcement. And how you doing, Will?
Good. How are you today?
Good. You know, I was enjoying the Skype picture we had of you because you were in your car.
Yeah, I was actually camping. You guys caught me on vacation, so I saw your little bit on having technology with you, so I guess I didn't do a very good job of getting away from it.
Oh, no, so maybe we can reconnect. But that was pretty cute. You're in your car, and that was great. It's the first time I ever Skyped anybody in from their car, and I noticed in the back seat you had a couple of Slurpers. You must have some kids.
I do. I've got 3 of them.
Nice to have you with us today. Your book is fascinating. What inspired you to go down this road?
Well, this one was one of those that was inspired a lot out of conversations I'd had with my non-Christian friends. And one of the things that I kept coming across and talking with people was that they had a hard time acknowledging that a man and Jesus could be God, and the miracles and things like that. And we live in a skeptical society. And at one point, I most of my life, I've always tried to prove, that he was God. And then finally, I just said, well, maybe how about you just forget the fact that he's God for right now, and how about you just study him like any other person, like you'd study any other person in history. Right. He's left quite a legacy, and so maybe that'd be worth looking into. And I found that the more people would look into what he would teach in the context that he taught it, in the time in history that he lived, that he taught it, that I was getting overwhelmingly positive responses with the fact that they had never actually taken the time to look at him just as a person, and in doing that, that's where they found his divinity.
All right, so you clearly are looking at the human side of Christ, which is a fine line between the human and the divine, but he obviously lived both roles.
He did, and one of the things that I think for a lot of Christians, and at least for me, is that I spend most of my life viewing Jesus as God, and I can worship him as God, and I can admire him as God. I can be in awe of him as God. But one of the things that's kind of hard to do is to relate to him as God, because we are not God, obviously. But there was a very human side of him, a part that is very relatable to us, and that I think we can learn a lot from, that I think often gets obscured by the fact that he was God. And I think it's sometimes scary to look at, well, how human might he have been, and how much humanity was there. But I think as people, that's the part, at least for me anyway, that's the part that I've learned a great deal from, because it's taught me more about how to be me.
Yeah. Well, it's the part that we can most identify with as well, and that makes, like you say, his divinity even more clear. Well, let's get into this a little bit, Will. As a human, Christ, the human side of him. In your research and in your study, how did he handle prayers that weren't answered the way he wanted them?
Well, I think that's one that a lot of us can relate to. We've all had those prayers we've prayed, that especially like healing prayers.
Right.
A friend is sick or a family member, and we pray and pray and pray, and and then nothing happens. And I don't know if we've all had it, but I've had friends that died, and it's very frustrating, because you open up your Bible and here's this guy that would walk up and say a word, put his hand on somebody, and they were healed, and then we're told to be like him.
Right.
And so when we do that and it doesn't work, I think it makes us think that, okay, I have a problem. I'm not connected, or there's some issue there. It can be very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I talk about in the book is that I wish there were more stories of how he would have handled unanswered prayers, because that's something that I could relate to a lot better, or at least to a great deal, when it comes to my personal life. And one of the things that was fascinating to me is that as I was going through the book, I realized that there is one unanswered prayer that the Bible contains in regards to Jesus, and that was his prayer in the garden for a different way.
Right.
In the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, "Let this cup pass," and that prayer was not answered. And what's fascinating about it is that Jesus continued to pray all night, and at the end of that prayer, we see him, a guy who was just an hour ago, sweating drops of blood and terrified and not knowing what to do and pleading with God to save his life. It says he rose up and went out to meet his accusers. And one of the things that I discovered in that is that one of the things that Christ taught me is that when we pray, we're typically asking God to change our environment or change our situation,
right,
to make it more bearable for us. And in the instances where he doesn't, in that case, he's changing us. Jesus went from being scared and nervous to being strong and powerful. He became more powerful through that unanswered prayer as he went out to face this challenge. And I think that it's important that prayer works two ways. One, it can change our environment, but in the other way, it changes us, and it can change us and prepare us to face our environment.
How did you deal with that? I don't know really how to define it, but that moment when Jesus began to realize that he wasn't a human being, that he was divine, and that we see that at Mount Transfiguration, where he went from the human to the divine and back again. But how did you deal with this, the understanding of him, understanding who he really was?
That was an interesting one because, from a lot of my life, I was under this idea that Jesus just always knew who he was. He was born, just always knew who he was. And one of the things that I think is interesting is people, we're born and we have to learn who we are.
Right.
We have to learn who our parents, our history, and our genealogy. We have to learn who our culture. And so if Jesus didn't have to do that, then he would have missed out on a huge part of being human. And so I based much of the book around in Philippians, where it says that he made himself nothing and became a man. He lowered himself, and that translation is that he emptied himself, and so he essentially set aside aspects of his divinity or aspects of access to his power. And one of the questions asked in the book is, did he have to discover who he was like everybody else does?
Right.
And if that's the case, then what a wild ride he had to go on.
Wow.
To not only figure out that I'm Jesus, the son of Mary, and
right.
got this Joseph guy who's my stepdad, but I'm the very Son of God, and the whole world is riding on me succeeding. And one of the things I think was interesting is that after the resurrection on the road to Emmaus, Jesus was walking along with two guys, and they didn't know it was him. And it says he used the Old Testament to go through and tell them all the things that were going to happen to the Messiah. And so clearly, Jesus knew, based on his studies of the Old Testament, what the Messiah was going to go through. And so I speculate in the book that once that clicked, how much of a fervent hunger would you have to study the Old Testament if you knew it told your story and who you were going to be. Wow.
All right, before I take a break, let me ask you one other quick question. How did Jesus as a man deal with materialism?
I think in our culture that's a tough one, because for us to, even when we have so much, we feel like we don't have that much.
Right.
And I think I used to think that he used to deny himself and that this was more of a sacrificial kind of thing.
Right.
And but I think Jesus was about freedom. And the more I look at the way he lived his life, I really think he found more freedom in not having things. That, when I leave, like I said, I'm on vacation, so when I left, I had to make sure the water was shut off, and I had to make sure that the doors were locked, and I had to make sure that people, I have all these worries about back home that if I didn't have all that stuff, I wouldn't have to worry about it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a level of freedom that comes in denying yourself of these things that I think a lot of times we see it as a sacrificial thing, and I think in Jesus' case, I think he saw it as a benefit.
Wow. All right, let me take a quick break right here. We're talking to Will Hathaway. He's the author of a couple of books, What If God Is Like This, and his latest book called The Human Side of Christ. And I even think there's book number 3 coming out. We'll talk to him about that in just a few moments. Okay, we're back, and our guest today is Will Hathaway. He's the author of What If God Is Like This, and his latest book called The Human Side of Christ. And we're Skyping him in from his vacation. Actually, we're not Skyping him, we're talking to him from his vacation. And there's a picture of the book on the screen. Will, again, thank you for letting us interrupt time with your family. Didn't hope that's not too intrusive, but enjoying the conversation, because this book is very fascinating. And we're talking about the human side of Christ, and this basically came out of your argument of trying to defend Christ as God. Then you realize probably the best way to witness is to bring him back to the human side. Is that correct?
It is,
Good. All right. Did he ever, well, we knew he was lonely. How did he handle it? How did he handle loneliness? We all deal with that.
You know, I think that he probably, you know, for the lonely people out there, and I'm sure there are people watching and listening right now that are affected by this, he probably knows that better than anybody. Because at a certain point in his life, he figured out he was very different, and I think he figured that out pretty early, even divinity aside. You know, we look at his mom, and we see that you know, that there was the virgin birth, and that Joseph married her to cover up the pregnancy, essentially, or to protect her from the effects of the pregnancy. And you know, in that day and age, that was almost a death sentence for a woman.
Right.
I mean, in some cases, it was. And so Jesus, as the child, the offspring of an illegitimate birth, would have been under immense scrutiny. And we look at the Bible, and I think we read it and assume that, okay, well, the birth was covered up, or you know, Joseph married her, and so everything went smoothly. But one of the things that Jesus was in a debate with the Pharisees at one point, and one of the comments that they make is that they're not the sons of fornication, and the implication of that is that Jesus was. And I think that we have to be honest and say that if a young woman came out and said that her pregnancy was from God and a miracle when she was a virgin, I think that back then she probably would have been met with about the same level of skepticism as if a young lady did that today. And so as a result of that, Jesus, I think, would have been completely ostracized by a great number of people, including possibly even his own siblings, as they tried to distance himself from the one in the family who was of illegitimate birth. So, and then you mix into that the discovery of his divinity and who he is and the Son of God. And I think one of the things that Jesus turned to was God himself. As humans, I think we struggle a lot with self-worth, and we struggle a lot at times. Some of us do with am I worth and am I valuable? And one of the great examples we have from Jesus is that everywhere you see him talking about God, he's always talking about how pleased God is with him, and how God loves him, and the Father's pleased with me. And he just fully embraced the idea that God loved him. And I know that I'm not very good at that, and I think we're not very good at that. And I think the first thing somebody could say is, well, he was perfect. Of course God would love him. But if Jesus knew he had to remain perfect for God to love him, then he would have known that that was conditional love. And God's love isn't conditional. So I think it's just being able to fully embrace that, as you look around at the beauty of this creation and this world, that the one who created it all considers you the pinnacle of this creation, and embracing that, I think, is a very powerful thing to help with loneliness and insecurity and feeling a lack of worth.
You know, it's so interesting. Other parts of his humanity obviously got hungry and thirsty. We all do that. As you mentioned earlier about loneliness and, of course, materialism. Did he ever struggle with lust?
You know, this might sound bad, but I hope he did.
No,
I think that's one of the most frustrating aspects of the entire Jesus story, is that for humanity, our sexuality is one of the biggest parts of our personal makeup.
Right. And
the Bible is pretty silent on how, you know, the greatest example of how to be a human in the history of the world, how he handled it.
Right.
And I speculate that Jesus may have had just a different perspective on the opposite gender than most of us do. In that, I think that you know, he what we do see that's really interesting in the Bible is that he treated women so differently than their culture dictated them to be treated. You know, men would not speak to women in public. They wouldn't let them sit and talk. You know, and we see him with letting women, you know, stop serving him and come and sit at his feet and listen. We see him touching a woman with a hemorrhage, one of the most unclean possible things you could do in that culture. He took the time to touch her and give her a human connection. He spoke with the woman at the well. He treated them so differently and than they would have ever been treated by any other man or any other person in their culture. And I think that's a real window into the fact that he saw something there that was very different than everybody else. And I would speculate that maybe the upbringing that he may have had, especially if it was out that Joseph was not his direct father, that he probably could have related to women more than most men in knowing what it felt like to be ostracized and put down and treated as a piece of property and things like that. And so I wonder in the book if maybe one of the things that maybe beyond the lust, he saw just the hurt that these women would have experienced in that culture, and maybe that was what would have overwhelmed him with compassion towards them.
Well, one thing he
did. But yeah, that's one that I would really like to. I wish the Bible spoke more on that one.
Well, yeah, but I think it does. It just doesn't in the way that it's hard for us at times to actually control. But it's pretty clear in some areas.
Yeah, I mean, as far as him personally. I think.
Oh yeah, no question about it. And I'm sure you get that a lot, especially writing a book like this. And your comment on women, he showed them dignity, which the culture didn't, which was kind of interesting. Let me ask you this: I don't remember of any failures of Jesus. So could he handle failures, or did he ever experience that?
The closest, I didn't talk about this in the book, but the closest thing I could think of failure would be, and I don't even know if I'd go so far as to call it a failure, but when he went on that journey across the lake there, where he healed the man with the demons that was running among the tombs.
Right.
And he tried to reach out to the people there, but they were so scared of him, they asked him to leave. And so he did. But he left that man there as a testament to what he had done, and then the Bible indicates that later on he may have come back and that they may have accepted him then. But yeah, that would be another interesting one in that how would he have handled failure? And the other thing is, I think we have such a warped perspective on what success and failure really is. I think like for instance, trying to Skype in this morning and could get the Skype to work, that would be viewed in our culture as kind of a little bit of a failure.
Yeah.
But really, what is the main purpose? The main purpose is to communicate, to connect with people,
right.
And so I think he would have had such a profoundly different perspective on what failure really was. I think failure for Jesus was failure to be authentic and failure to be real, and hypocrisy and things like that. I think were things he would have considered to be a failure, rather than just not achieving something.
Yeah, fascinating. As you went through this experience, Will, and again, this is part of your study of apologetics, but as you went through this and you dealt with the human side of Christ, how has it impacted you in your ministry?
Yeah, this has been one of the most, if I don't sell a single book, this was totally worth it. It has been one of the most fascinating spiritual journeys I've gone on in my life, in that, we were made in God's image, and we were made to be in God's image. And here we have the perfect, the best example and the most documented example of a perfect human that we can find anywhere in history is Jesus of Nazareth. And with that, most of my life I was too busy looking at him as God than to look at the human part of him and recognize that there was something there that was immensely helpful in teaching me how to be human. We're the only creature on earth that has to learn how to be what we are. A dog knows how to be a dog, and a cat knows how to be a cat, but people have to learn how to be people. We're naturally kind of fake. We naturally hide things. We even wear clothes. We hide our own bodies. We hide our emotions. We hide all kinds of aspects of us. And one of the things that Jesus said is that to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must become like a little child. And having small children, I find it interesting that little kids, they'll run around naked, and emotionally they'll be naked. They'll tell you exactly what they're thinking. They're just completely real.
Right.
And then we teach them to not be real. We teach them, all right, you need to put your clothes back on there, stop running around, stop being silly, and tell grandma her meatloaf tastes good even if it doesn't. And we start with good intentions, and we call it being polite, but essentially we're also teaching people to be fake. And we start to lose. I've never heard of a cow going on a 7-year backpack trip to find itself. They know what they are, and we're the only ones that don't. I find that really interesting as far as who we are.
No, that is a great point. Well, listen, before we run out of time, give us a sneak preview of your next book, When Dead Men Walk, The Return of Authentic Humanity. What are you doing here?
When Dead Men Walk is that's still about a year or so out, and that was basically going to look at it's going to further examine just our humanity. I looked at Jesus' humanity in this book. Now I'm going to look at our humanity. And as people, one of the things we tend to do as people is we look at being human as a limitation. I'm only human. It's human to fail. It's human to be flawed. It's human to make mistakes. But if you go back and look at the original being human was being in the image of God. And so to be human is a great honor. And I think that our problem is not that we're human, but that we're not human enough. We actually have lost our humanity. And so it's using Jesus as an example to try and regain that and to move on into better communion with God as a creature made in His image.
Well, Will, fascinating. Your insight is just very intriguing. Thank you so much. And again, his first book is What If God Is Like This? And the one we talked about today, The Human Side of Christ. And then in about a year or so, look for the next one coming out, When Dead Men Walk. But check it out at the Christian bookstores or online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And get a copy of it. I think you'll find it to be a fascinating read. Rulo, thank you again, and thank you for letting us interrupt your vacation. Blessings to you and your family, and keep up the good work, my friend.
You as well, my friend. Thank you, Perry.
See you later. All right, we'll be right back.